Down the right field line, pretty well hit. LaVarn way is the right way here tonight.
Yogi Berra said it's 90% mental, the other half is physical. My name is Ryan LaVarnway, Major League catcher and minor league grinder, and I've spent the last 15 years playing professional baseball while evolving my mindset. I'm fascinated by optimizing that 90%. In this show, I'll talk to elite athletes and mindset coaches about what makes them tick and how they've overcome obstacles in their own careers on the way to finding success. This is Finding the Way. Hey guys, welcome to Finding the Way. This is Ryan LaVarnway, and today I'm joined by Carson Tueller. Not a pro sports player, but with an incredible story of overcoming. I'm really excited to share it with you and to share his message because I think it's really powerful. Carson, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So you grew up in a military family where you moved around the country. You have 5 siblings. Every 3 years you're on the move. And then 2013 was a lot of change happened in 2013 for you. Why don't you take our listeners through what happened 10 years ago?
Yeah. So I had just returned from serving a Mormon mission. I was in a big Mormon military family, came home from living 2 years in South America and was studying pre-med when that winter I realized that it was time for me to come out, time for me to talk about this with my family. And it was a really disruptive conversation, but by the end of that year, things were going well. I was kind of like figuring some things out and incorporating this into my identity. And then at the end of 2013, I was in an accident that broke my neck and paralyzed me from the chest down. So that was in the middle of my sophomore year. And so, everything about my life really changed in 2013. Everything I dreamed about for my future, everything I thought I would become, everything I thought I would do was like completely upended. And I was forced to really reckon with who is Carson if he's not everything he has done for the past 23 years at that point.
That sounds like a huge identity crisis in the making for sure.
It was. It really was.
I had Jake Olson as a guest in season 2, and he was the first blind Division I football player. He lost his eyesight early in childhood, but had known what it was like to have eyesight and then to lose it. It's a similar situation with you. You weren't born paralyzed from the chest down, and this is something you lost in high school. Talk me through like what that must have been like and what was going through your head and just everything that you were feeling, because that's something that most people are never going to experience, but hopefully people don't have to, but talk us through it.
I will tell you, I think that paralysis has been such a gift because it forced me to learn what I think every human being could benefit from around concepts of identity and freedom. Like when I say I am, or when you say I am, what are you referring to? I had to grapple with that question. So I'm sitting there in like my hospital bed 3 weeks after my injury. When like just a month before I was like sprinting across campus trying to make it to microbiology on time. And now I can barely move my hands. And I just had this distinct memory of sitting in front of my phone. It was like the middle of the night. My family had gone home. And there were like 3 words on my phone screen because I had barely had enough to like tap with my thumbs. And there were just 3 words, and it was paralyzed, paralyzed, paralyzed. Because I just was grappling with this idea of who am I? If not all the things that I had done. I was used to defining the self as a list of like my accomplishments, my certain personality characteristics, my competitiveness, my perfectionistic tendencies. I was an athlete. I was like a swimmer my whole life and a musician, and I just was always on the go, and suddenly everything I used to define myself was no longer accessible to me. And so I had to ask that question, who is Carson without any of that? And a part of answering that question is, what is my value as a human being? Because part of the identity crisis was not just being like, who am I? It was also like, well, all of those things made me valuable. I had all this evidence for that I was like a valuable human being because I was winning stuff,
Yeah.
right? Who am I and why am I value if I'm not winning, if I can't win anymore in a kind of way? So this that was really the beginning of the next 10 years journey of what would become an obsession with philosophy, right? Like philosophers have spent their entire, I mean, so many years asking this question of like, what is the self? And how are we really free to be? Anyway, and so that was kind of like the beginning of this complete and utter deconstruction of my identity, and then starting to slowly answer that question: who am I?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I was a philosophy major in college, so my
Oh yeah,
my mind is like zinging with
yes,
all of these possibilities you're talking about. I want to double click on the identity piece of it because it's so easy to do that, right? I am a person that played in the major leagues for 10 years. I am a World Series champion. I am an Olympian. I am, whatever. But
yeah,
that is what I have done. That is
that's
not
right.
who I am. And just the way that you said paralysis has been such a gift. Like, what a perspective for you to have. That's so incredible. And I want to hear how do you define yourself now? When you say I am, how do you answer that? And how can we benefit from the perspective that you've gained as, me now and then and the listeners?
Yeah, yeah. I have so many thoughts. Okay, first, I don't know if I'm going to answer your questions in order, so I'm just going to go with what
Perfect.
kind of is coming to the top of my head here. Um, in a way, what I learned from paralysis is that I was outsourcing my sense of identity and worthiness to things that I could win and achieve. I see this a lot with my high performer coaching clients. Is there's a drive and a competitiveness that works for them for a long time, and they are the best and they do win. And then oftentimes they get to the end of that road and they go, I thought that this would solve all my angst. I thought this would solve my problems. I thought I would end winning feeling like that would be enough, like it would fill my cup, right? So the reason I say paralysis was such a gift, and I truly don't say that in an ironic way. I'm not saying that to be like positive or like to put a positive spin on it. I'm like, this was like forcing a variable to remain still. So I was required to figure some things out without changing my circumstances, right? Because after 2 years of recovery, it became clear that I would not have the kind of spinal cord injury that changed or got better. It's called a complete spinal cord injury. So really was a gift. And that gift was that I was required to like I was required to stop outsourcing all of that worth to what I could do and my identity, and instead really start to sit with, if I could never prove another thing or win another thing, what makes Carson valuable? Could I be valuable inherently and just with myself, right? So a kind of sense of like inherent worth. And there's again like a lot of philosophy involved in that, and it requires us to challenge a lot of our assumptions about what makes us who we are, and again, what makes us feel like we're enough in life. So um, that was kind of the process.
Yeah. And having read a lot of these philosophers, they talk about the higher self, the self that is in the head and in the soul and not in the body.
Yeah.
I wanna really hold you to it here.
Yeah.
When you say I am, and it no
Yeah.
longer has to do
Yeah.
with your accomplishments, and it no longer is being outsourced to the things that you've done or to other people.
Yes.
How do you finish that sentence?
Yes. Okay. So without this being a cop out, because I'll come out and answer your question for real. But But I often do say I am in the practice of discovering who I am. I don't know who I am until I'm being it, right? So I will say this. I believe that there seems to be a sort of self that exists separately from my emotional states, my thoughts, and my physical sensations. And when I do the work of observing those three things, my thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations, I can then choose who to be. The self that is driving those decisions, I believe, is the selfest, the most Carson piece of me that can discover, okay, if I'm not hustling to prove anything, if I can separate myself from like the emotions that I'm having or the thoughts that I'm having, there's a self that knows what it wants. And that's kind of like what I've discovered through my journey with paralysis is when I was able to like create that separation between, okay, I had all of these pressures to perform in a particular way. Who am I without that? Who am I at baseline? There was just a self that was waiting that was already whole and complete that didn't have to prove anything. It was really all of like the systems and the external expectations that constantly forced me to feel like I had to perform. Does this make sense?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So let's sort through it, right? There's a lot there. Um, the external pressures feels like the hustle and bustle, right? Especially like in the current economic climate we're in, everything's getting more expensive. The job market is what it is, but ultimately you have to perform at a certain level to meet your needs, to keep a roof over your head, to keep food on the table.
Um,
Is that what you're talking about at external pressures, or are you talking more about social, societal pressures, expectations, keeping up with the Joneses, trying to
yeah.
get the biggest next trophy? What do you mean by external pressures, and what do you mean once those are gone, you can have your selfiest self?
Self yourself. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I conceptualize this in the context or the format of games. Okay. So I'll give you an example with spinal cord injury. When I broke my neck and became paralyzed, I unknowingly entered into a system of value. So I believe that we have really two choices in terms of how we live our lives. We either live a life guided by pure self expression, which is what I was describing earlier, that selfiest self. Pure self expression is a kind of guided life. The other is participating or being guided by someone else's game. So when I talk about external pressures or systems, what I'm talking about are these like imaginary frameworks that tell us what's good and bad, right, wrong, how to live, who to be, what makes us more or less valuable. When I broke my neck, I didn't realize it, but I was participating in this game called What It Means to Have a Good Body. And I was suddenly participating in a game where I was now paralyzed and I experienced my worth as having depreciated, right? Caused a lot of suffering. So at the time, my feelings were no one will love me. I'm never going to have a partner. I'm a burden to society. Like all of these stories and these experiences came as a part of participating in this imaginary system that ranks bodies from like good to bad or whole to incomplete, right? My big breakthrough was when I called bullshit, really. And when I said, wait, and this is the philosophy part, what does it mean to have a good body? Does paralysis mean I really can't live a life that is as meaningful and as beautiful as I could have before I was injured? Right. So when I talk about games, I think about games as these like artificial structures. They're made up and they are They exist because we agree on them, right? So like in soccer, there's a chalk line, right? And players interact with that chalk line like it is an electric fence, like it's real, like you really can't pass that line, right? And there are systems of value. The ball is better in that goal than it is in this goal, right? And so there's like a whole structure around this. I think about life in terms of these systems. So my big discovery with paralysis was that when I'm unknowingly participating in these other systems of value, I lose access to the self-guided life. So when I kind of reclaimed, there was a very specific incident that had like woke me up and made me see that my body was whole and complete, sitting in this wheelchair, paralyzed, and that I can have anything I want for my life. When that was me leaving the game, that was me saying, I'm not going to follow this framework anymore.
Okay.
I'm going to create a life for myself based off of like what I want, that self-guided life. And so that was when everything about my life changed. That was when I started speaking. That was when I started traveling. That was when I started dating. Everything happened because of leaving a game and coming back to myself and then being guided by that self. Does that make any sense?
That makes total sense. And now I'm curious, what was the event that happened that opened your mind to leaving this game?
Yeah, it was my sister. She was 13 years old. We were in the car together. I had been in the habit of calling the day that I was injured, I called it the day of my death, kind of jokingly. Um, and yeah, get a reaction from my family. And she turned to me because I made mention of it for some reason I can't remember, but she turned to me and she said, "What if we called that the day of your rebirth?" And I thought, "Oh, that's cute." And no, that's like the day I broke my neck. You know what I mean? Like, but I left and I was going to the gym and I was asking myself who was right between us. Like, was it the day of my death, the day my life ended, or was it the day that my life began? And was like this beautiful rebirth. Who was to say? And I couldn't find an answer, and that really disturbed me. And that was when I realized, oh, all that happened is that I broke my neck. The bones in my neck literally moved and hit my spinal cord. And now my body works the way it does and the way it doesn't. That is the only thing that's happening here. There's no good, there's no bad, right or wrong. I get to say what that means. And that day, I decided that the day that I broke my neck was the day the stars aligned and I became who I was supposed to be. Because that's so much more empowering than the day that I died, right?
Yeah, no, it's a value question.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yes. And if we get to the premises of really every single thing that we think about ourselves and about life, it comes back to that question, what is good and what is bad? What makes us worthy or unworthy? And we have the freedom to rewrite those things when we can find them.
That's so powerful. Man, your little sister is very wise.
Yeah. She loves that I tell this story. She's like, "Do you tell that story still?"
That's funny. How old is
Like
she now?
18.
All right, well, now she'll start telling the story herself.
That's right. Yeah.
Um, so on your website, you say that, your philosophy is that our lives are lived inside of the narratives we create about ourselves, our circumstances, and our experiences, and that the results that people produce, whether in the workplace, in their relationships, or any area of their life, are generally impacted by their sense of personal worth. That's
Yeah.
that's your story.
Yeah, for sure.
So as you're coaching restless high performers, as you're coaching people in corporate America,
Yeah.
how do you use that concept to help other people who are objectively still in the game unless they choose to leave it? It honestly sounds like you're talking about us living in the Matrix, right? You take the red pill or the
Yes.
blue pill,
It's so much.
and it's the
Yes.
it's the value
I'm glad you
system that
said
we're
that.
all bought into.
Yes.
But instead of being plugged into a computer, it's just values.
Yes. That's it. Yes. And it is as imaginary as a matrix. So like truly, if we look at like a game of chess, chess only works if we all keep the rules. Who made up the rules? Thousands of years ago, people made up the rules. Like, but it's made up is the point, right? And if I start to move differently along a chessboard, chess starts to break down, right? We've all kind of unknowingly, like you said it perfectly. We've bought into these systems, but the reason that we haven't known is because they're sold to us as reality. We just think, of course winning is better than losing, right? And of course it's better to be this way than that way. So we have all these value systems that are like imaginary rules that we all participate in. So to answer your question with high performers, the reason I love working with high performers is because so many of them are inherently seekers, I think. They are driven by a desire to find fulfillment, to make a difference, to be someone, to do something. And sometimes they don't realize that they're doing some of that by looking for and acquiring their worth, right? And so I love working with these people because once we just kind of see some of these systems, see the ways in which some of this, like the high performance, is actually a way to acquire value rather than doing it just for its own sake, there's some freedom to start building fulfillment in other areas and finding some relief from the pressure to constantly perform. That's like one of the best things I got from my spinal cord injury is I was like, oh my God, if I'm just like good the way I am, I don't have to spend the rest of my life exhausted in proving that I'm good, right? And then I can actually do things for their own sake. I'm still competitive. I still love to win. I still, but it's not because I have to feel good about myself. So the thing about the Matrix or the thing about games is when you can see them, then you can choose to keep playing or not. These games have power when they're invisible. And so when we suddenly have this awakening, like I did with paralysis, and frankly, the same exact thing happened with like coming out. It was going, oh, wait, I thought I was like depraved and evil for having these feelings. And what if that's not true? Questioning the premises of the game and then creating something else. So, but once people can see the game they're playing, it's like, if I could snap my fingers, my hands are paralyzed. I would like, it's like a snap, like something happens, the light bulb turns on, and there's new freedom. So
Now you're reminding me of another movie, and I don't want to keep bringing it back to the movie, but the movie Big Daddy. When
I haven't
when
seen it actually.
okay, so the premise is that he wrongfully kind of adopts or fosters this young boy, and the boy's super cute, but he's hanging out with his friends and they're playing cards, and with another friend, and they put the cards down, and he just goes, "I win." And he's like, "What do you mean you won? Like, that's not the same. Like, you win every time." He's like, because he's not playing by your rules.
Yeah.
And if you redefine the game, this is me translating what I hear you saying in another way that I understand, and let me know if I'm getting it right. You can redefine your own rules. You don't have to play the game that you've been playing or that society wants you to play. And then by redefining your own rules, your own value system, you can win every time.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And that's why, I mean, this is the most remarkable and miraculous thing about being a human being. It honestly like moves me in the deepest parts of my soul because this is what allows people to be in remarkably difficult circumstances and to create this wild sense of fulfillment and peace of mind. Like people like Viktor Frankl, right? Who have endured some of the worst that humanity has to offer and then choose who to be. It all has to do with games. And the reason it does is because humans are meaning making creatures. And games are a way for us to conceptualize meaning into systems so that we have order and we understand the world. It's just that often when we're not aware of the games we're playing, it can cause us a great amount of suffering. And so I really believe that freedom is available to people in any circumstance. And I am so grateful for the experiences I've had in my life because it happened to me the other day. I was like literally moved to tears again in this quadriplegic body going, I cannot believe what a miraculous life I get to live.
Wow.
And it's only because I know how to create meaning and also how to call bullshit on meaning that doesn't work.
So can you take me through a more hard example right now? Because when you define the high performer, I like felt bad about it, but I identify, right? I've been striving my whole life. I in the rat race, all these different things.
Yeah.
For the benefit of our listeners, take me through like a 2-minute exercise right now of how do I stop playing the game I'm playing and find that freedom, that meaning that you are, I can see through the screen how happy you are just talking about it.
Yeah. I'm so glad to hear that. Okay. First question is, where do you experience suffering? And by suffering, I mean a sense of lack of fulfillment, unease. I mean, I kind of define suffering pretty broadly, but it's a sense that something's off. It's a sense that something's missing. So these are the breadcrumbs that games leave when we're playing the wrong game, a game that doesn't work for us, is it always ends up in some kind of suffering. Sometimes it does feel like a proving or a hustle, right?
Yeah.
Or worry, stress, anxiety, depression. Like a lot of these things are all symptoms of I'm playing the wrong game here. I'm bought into something that's hurting me. So that's the first thing I would ask is where are you experiencing suffering or stress or any of these words that I've used?
Would you mean in what activity or what aspect of my life, is that what you're asking?
Yes. So I would ask, so sometimes there's a very specific one that people are just immediately comes to mind where they're like my relationship or this area of life where I just constantly feel unfulfilled. But another way to access that question is what areas of life aren't working as well as you want them to work or aren't working at all. That's also good access to that question.
Okay.
So I'll start there because that always gives me the clue where someone's participating in something that's hurting them. And then once we get there, I would have to have like a concrete example probably for this to be like real life stuff on the court kind of stuff. But eventually, what we do is we start asking about questions about the meaning behind the thing. So I asked the question.
I'll give you a hard example right now.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
we had some weather damage on a property, and I decided to fix it myself
yeah,
because I'm Tim the Toolman Taylor, I guess.
yeah,
And it's been exhausting, and I'm so over it, and that in a way that's leading me to suffering.
yeah.
So let's use that as the hard example for right now.
Yes. Okay. So does this cause you, when you say it causes you suffering, like tell me more about that, how that feels for you?
I feel exhausted. I don't want to do it anymore.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And is this something that like is a recurring thing in your life, or is it just this one particular instance?
Um, as far as a recurring theme, maybe as a high performer, I bite off more than I can chew.
Okay. Okay. And so do you have the experience of being burned out or overwhelmed or ex like you use the word exhausted? Do you feel that like frequently?
Um, when I'm not, so this brings me full circle to what you're saying, right? When I'm not doing something that matters,
Yeah.
these other things feel like extra, like I don't need to do them.
Yes, like they're taking you away from doing like actually being productive or moving your life in the right direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's the real problem with that? What's the real problem with not moving your life in that kind of direction?
Um, maybe it makes me feel like I don't have like you only have so many F's to give, right? Or you only have so much energy in a day. And if you're giving it to this wrong thing, you don't feel like you have enough towards the right thing.
hmm hmm And so when you're not accomplishing the things that like really matter to you, what does it really bring up? There's probably like a sensation or a there's a piece of meaning behind that that makes it feel like a problem.
Yeah. Like if I don't do those things,
Yeah. Why is living in this direction of like producing in a really meaningful way actually better than fixing that thing.
Oh man, this is getting deep really quick. Because if I don't produce, I'm not valuable, right? Or I'm not doing the things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Is
that's
that
your
how it feels to you?
and isn't that your point?
I mean, is that really your experience?
I think so. I mean, I think yeah, you do the stuff. And then that makes if
Yeah.
if you don't do the stuff, then what are you doing?
Right. Yeah. What does it mean about you if you don't do this stuff?
I guess I would feel like an underachiever,
Uh-huh.
or like I didn't live up to the potential that I could have done the stuff.
Yeah. 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 Good. Good. Potential. Yes. Potential is a very, very loaded word for high performers, right? The ever elusive potential. Yeah. Yeah. So I think I would ask, is it empowering or disempowering to have the experience that your life only matters if you're making a difference and being productive and achieving amazing things?
I think it would be very freeing to not have to and then choose to anyway.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Because then you're doing it for its own sake. Remember when I said pure self-expression or the game?
Yeah.
Driven by the game is saying, I have to make a difference in the world because then I'll be a high achiever. I have these goals. I'll meet my potential. I'll finally be da, 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 da. That's the game, right? So the game drives the behavior of I'm gonna make this kick-ass podcast, right? Or whatever it is. If you gave up that whole game and you actually found within yourself this sense of like, you know what? I could do nothing for the rest of my life and I would be a whole and complete man. I would be good. Then there's this open space for you to say, what do I really want for myself in my life? And the thing that shows up might be the podcast, but it will be because the podcast inspires and lights you up, not because you need it in order to have created some value.
Yeah. And the way you get there is thousands of years of philosophical meditation.
Yes. It's remarkably simple once you start the practice of questioning the premise. It's always the premise, right? In this case, the premise is simply making a difference is better than fixing the thing that broke.
Yeah.
Being productive is better than not being productive. Is that really true? I mean, like a real question, is that a capital T truth that cannot be argued? I don't think so. Who's to say?
Very cool. Well,
So then the question becomes, does this empower me or not? Does this give me the sense of myself and freedom that I want or not?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh no, you've certainly given me a lot to think about, and hopefully, as we were doing this exercise very quickly, our listeners were finding their own examples to run through this exercise with, or listen back to it a second time and pick your own examples. So, Carson, I'm gonna let you go after one more question. I always ask every guest this before the end of the episode. If you could speak to a young Carson or someone like a young Carson, and let's say before your accident, because that was the day of your rebirth.
Yeah. Yeah.
From the perspective you've gained now 10 years later, what's the best advice you could give them?
I would say to listen to the restlessness. Because I always thought that that meant like something was wrong with me. But I think if I had listened to it, it was just really pointing to me to what we're talking about, that there are new levels of freedom available. And that was an important symptom of it. And so I would tell him to listen to that restlessness. And I would also reassure him, like, the person that you want to become is absolutely within your reach.
That's wonderful.
That's what I'd say.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Carson. For Carson Tueller, for Ryan Lavarnway, this has been Finding the Way. I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Finding the Way with Ryan Lavarnway. Find previous episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.